I sat in the car, tiredly smiling as I turned onto State Road 2080. We were almost there, finally, after 5 long hours of driving. Including rush hour traffic and what felt like an endless traffic jam, we had arrived. Just a few more kilometers, and the small white chapel on the side of the road, where we were supposed to meet, would appear in the headlights. Quite eerie, crossed my mind as I looked around. There wasn't a single streetlight on the forest road ahead of us. The road was paved, but to my left and right, all I saw were a few branches and gaping darkness. Nevertheless, I was filled with excitement. In a few minutes, I would meet my best friends. We knew each other from an online game and were scattered across Germany. So you can imagine how challenging it was to plan this meeting. If you're wondering why I drove into a dark forest for this, it was Ken's idea. Short for Kenny, the name of her character. She was our healer and quite a freak, but in the best possible way. She lived nearby and was supposed to be our host for the weekend. But before you think I'm completely insane for driving into a dark forest at night to meet some online acquaintances, let me reassure you. Firstly, this wasn't our first meeting, so I already knew the crazy bunch. And secondly, my 2-year older brother, one of our damage dealers, was sleeping in the passenger seat. So I wasn't alone. "Hey, Marvin, we're almost there," I said aloud. Immediately, my brother jolted awake. It took him a few seconds to orient himself. Then he looked around anxiously. "Pretty dark here," he remarked. "Are you sure we're in the right place, Linus?" I grinned widely. Despite my brother being quite the muscular guy, he was a bit of a scaredy cat. "We're even on the right road already," I explained, not without a hint of schadenfreude. Marvin's eyes widened. "If we get mugged or kidnapped here, I'm gonna strangle Ken," he muttered quietly. "Oh, come on," I replied, grinning. "You know what Mom always said? If anyone kidnaps us, they'll willingly bring us back the next day." Marvin responded with an incomprehensible grumble. Then he said louder, "We're almost 30 minutes late. If the others have gone somewhere without us, I don't want to be stuck in a dark forest while we figure it out." I hadn't thought about that, but luckily his concern was unnecessary. A few moments later, a small white building appeared on the roadside ahead of us. That had to be the Hubertus Chapel, and right in front of it stood a small group of 3 figures that were very familiar to me. I immediately slowed down, then turned onto the small unpaved parking lot where the others' cars were also parked. In the headlights, I saw a discarded bag of chips lying carelessly on the gray gravel before I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car with a wide grin. Although it was late, there was still a pleasant summer warmth in the air. I deeply breathed in the pleasant forest scent, tinged with the smell of earth, before turning towards the crunching footsteps approaching us. "Hey, Druid!" "Hey, Blade!" greeted us a tall man with a full beard and a notably high-pitched voice. He wore an orange t-shirt with the inscription, "Do quests, not crime." That was Balrog. He was our tank and the founder of our small group. Druid and Blade, on the other hand, were the usernames of me and my brother. Of course, we also knew the real names of the others, but it somehow felt wrong to use them among ourselves. There were also Ken, who stood out even in our colorful group with her black lipstick, numerous piercings and black nail polish, and Aldur, a real-life friend of Balrog and the youngest member of our group. "Hey guys," I greeted back. "Sorry for the delay. Blade and I got stuck in rush hour traffic after the jam." "No worries," Ken replied. There was a brief round of greetings and "how are you?" before Ken led us back to the chapel with a wide grin. The small white building had a red roof and 3 doorless archways through which you could enter directly inside. Inside, we were greeted by a barred gate, which surprisingly was not locked. A small altar adorned with various Christian decorations and flowers, a crucified figure of Jesus, and several candles. I couldn't shake the feeling that Ken had something to do with their presence, especially since some of them were black. "So, Kenny, why did you lead us to this charming chapel in the middle of the night?" Balrog asked, a question that also interested the rest of us. Online, she had always responded with a mysterious "you'll see." Ken still had a broad grin on her face as she ran her hand over the white wall. She was the only one who had stepped through the barred gate. The rest of us waited outside. You know, a heavy sigh passed through our group, while the rest of us started our meetings with an invitation to someone's home, where we usually ordered pizza, watched movies, or played board games. Ken had to come up with something special, but honestly, anything else would have surprised me with her. She was a bit eccentric, after all. Ken playfully raised an eyebrow. You know our deal. My brother sighed. The host determines the program, he said quietly. Or the hostess, Ken corrected him. So come on, turn off your phone flashlights. Come on, it'll be fun. I was immediately on board. After fantasy, horror was my second favorite genre. The others, however, seemed to take an unusually long time to turn off the flashlight function on their smartphones. Now, the only light came from the candles in the chapel, casting Ken's shadow eerily on the walls. It also felt like it had suddenly gotten a few degrees colder, while the trees and bushes around us rustled in the wind. A car zoomed by on the road, briefly enveloping us in the dazzling light of its headlights. Then Ken began her story. The White Lady of Ebersburg is a ghost that is said to appear at night on State Road 2080, right here at this chapel. It is said that she was once a young woman who had an accident here in the 1940s. According to the legend, the woman was traveling alone at night. She was walking along the roadside, signaling passing cars with a raised hand, indicating that she wanted a ride. However, no one stopped for her. The cars simply drove past her, just like the cars passing by this chapel. As if on cue, a car zoomed past us. The fortunate coincidence brought a satisfied smile to Ken's face. But if even just one person had given her a ride, or if the cars had all driven past her, I wouldn't have to tell this story, because one of the drivers wasn't paying attention for a brief moment. I have no idea if he was distracted by something. Maybe he fell asleep for a split second or had been drinking. Regardless, his car veered off the road. He struck the poor woman, although struck is probably not the right word. You can see how fast the cars race by here. Her body was likely flung several meters through the air like a crash test dummy before rolling a short distance on the ground and finally lying motionless. We all listened intently as Ken paused for suspense. I heard Alder gulp audibly, but if you think that the woman died instantly, you're mistaken. She survived the impact, was even conscious. The driver, who immediately rushed to her, was horrified by the sight. One of her arms had taken an unnatural position, bending at a different spot than the elbow. Her spine had a kink in the lower back, and one of her eyes stared lifelessly ahead while the other fixed on the man. "Help! Help me! Help!" The woman repeated over and over as if in a trance. But the man didn't help her. He was too horrified by the sight. The image of the dying woman had already been seared into his memory for the rest of his life. He also feared the consequences if people found out what he had done. So he left the woman behind. According to some rumors, he even dragged her away from the roadside, hiding her in the undergrowth so that her motionless body wouldn't be seen by the next passing car. Either way, whether he hid her or fled immediately, the man, if it was indeed a man, was never caught. Since that day, the restless soul of the woman dressed in a white gown of innocence is said to appear on this road, ready to seek revenge on anyone who carelessly drives past her, refusing to let her into their car even though she beckons with a raised hand, just like all those drivers back then who could have prevented her death. After Ken finished the sentence, she looked around the group. Grief shimmered in her eyes, although I didn't know if it was due to her convincing acting or if she truly felt the story so deeply. On the other hand, my brother and Balrog glanced around discreetly, as if fearing that the White Lady would actually emerge from the shadows of the trees. Meanwhile, I grinned broadly at Ken. So what does she do then? If she just stands by the roadside? That doesn't scare me at all. Maybe you should embellish the story a bit more, I suggested. The others looked at me incredulously. Ken, however, chuckled. Plenty of people have tried embellishing it already. Some claim she was with her children when the accident happened. They all died in the crash. But that's nonsense. She didn't have any children with her back then when my mom and I saw her. Now, she had our full attention again. You actually encountered her? My brother asked, disbelief in his voice. Ken nodded. Watch out. Don't fool us. Balrog warned. If a disguised woman jumps out of a bush here, we'll find ourselves a new healer. She simply winked playfully in response. Then she told us about her encounter. It happened several years ago now. I was still a little girl at the time when we were on our way home at night. Mom saw the woman first. Her white dress looked like a beacon in the headlights. Knowing how dangerous it could be for young women at this hour, especially in a place like this, she naturally stopped immediately. I don't remember the exact wording, but she asked me to roll down the window and asked the woman where she wanted to go. The woman, however, didn't say a single word. She just stood there and stared at us uncomfortably through the open window for an uncomfortably long time. I found it really creepy. Then she finally looked forward and pointed towards Ebersberg. Since that was also our way, Mom offered her to get in the back, which she immediately did, but she still didn't say a single word. I do remember Mom scolding me back then for staring at the woman. I like to say that I felt that something was off about her, but it was probably just childish curiosity. Anyway, after Mom scolded me, I sat back properly and secretly observed the woman through the window's reflection. Despite the darkness, I could still see her white dress clearly. Until I couldn't anymore. Suddenly, all I saw in the reflection was darkness. I immediately turned around, but the woman was gone. She had vanished from the car without a trace. Mom stopped the car immediately. We searched together for her, both the car and the road, but we couldn't find her anywhere. It was as if she had dissolved into thin air. And if you ask me, that's exactly what happened. We only learned about the legend of the White Lady of Ebersberg shortly after when Mom told an acquaintance about the encounter. I don't know if he believed us, but he told us that we were lucky. According to the legend, if we hadn't taken the woman with us, she would have reappeared in our car shortly afterward. She would have yanked the steering wheel to the side, causing us to crash into a tree. Then maybe you would have never met me. I realized that I was staring at her with my mouth open only after Kenny finished her story. Now, even I had goosebumps. Did she make it up to scare us? Or did it really happen to her? I could believe either. And when a car passed by us, honking, suddenly, probably the driver's idea of a joke, I nearly jumped onto my brother's arm. Startled, we all stared around in horror as if the White Lady had finally appeared. Then we burst into laughter. The spell was broken. Still on the way to the pub we visited after the gathering at the chapel, I looked into the forest more than once, searching for a white figure among the trees. And that evening, I made a firm decision. If I ever meet Kenny's mother, I will ask her about the White Lady. Then I will finally know if Ken made up the story or not.